Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Casandra Murray, and I am a doctoral student at the CUNY Graduate Center and a writing fellow here at Hostos Community College. Here with me today is Professor Kristopher Burrell, Associate Professor of History in the Behavioral and Social Sciences Department at Hostos. He has been kind enough to speak with me today about anti-racist teaching. Welcome, Professor Burrell, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
I'd really like to just ask your thoughts and to start off by asking, how do you incorporate anti-racist practices into your own teaching and research?
One of the things that I believe is most important that I always try to emphasize for my students is, learning how to ask relevant questions and to question the things that they are reading and seeing and hearing around them. And for me, it starts out with trying to emphasize what I learned as called the habits of mind. So these were, sort of 5 questions, 5 pillars of critical thinking that I, over the course of the semester, try to ingrain in students as a sort of humanistic scientific method in a way. Questions such as, how does this relate to other things? Whose viewpoint are we getting here? What is your proof? Why is this important? What if some variable were different? How might that change the outcome of what we're looking at? And if I can get students to consistently, without having been prompted, to ask these questions of the things that they are encountering, then they are going to inevitably sort of systematically become better questioners and more critical consumers of the information that they are taking in. And for me as a professor, remembering that students have to be taught how to ask good questions, that this is not necessarily something that is ingrained in us beyond the question of why, right? Which is a question that toddlers are really, really great at asking. And it is the sort of the foundation of all great questions to follow. But oftentimes I have found that I think throughout our lower educational levels, students, what happens is that they're systematically taught or told not to ask that most fundamental question. So by the time they get to us, I'm trying to get them to ask that question, right? And variations of that question more and more again. And I think that ability to question effectively is very empowering, right? And very liberating.
Yeah.
The other thing that I really emphasize, more in terms of the content of my classes is that I really emphasize to students that we're going to focus a lot on looking at policies and laws and the structure of our society in order to be able to understand what systemic discrimination is in the context of US history, how it has functioned, and hopefully getting students to recognize the ways in which it still exists. And I think that, part of anti-racist teaching is about teaching students to understand what and how structural discrimination has functioned and continues to function within our society. Because if you can't identify something, then you can't dismantle it.
I'm wondering how, if you were to define anti-racist teaching, what you might have to say about it.
I think that part of anti-racist teaching is the building and the reinforcement and the teaching of empathy among students, for other people, is being able to see the world through the perspective or from the perspective of someone else. And that quality is increasingly lacking, I feel, within our broader society. And so I think that part of anti-racist teaching is focused on getting people to understand the world, or at least their world, from the perspective of others. and that trying to, one, realize that, you're not the only person in the world, or that your point of view on certain issues are not the only views out there, even if it winds up, sort of strengthening what you previously believed. At least sort of encountering and interrogating other points of view, I think is really, really important and an anti-racist practice. I guess, I would add that it really is important that these types of ideas do actually permeate an entire institution. It is not really enough for this to be happening in the odd classroom,
Yes.
Because then your class appears aberrant. I would hope, and I think that Hostos has been, moving more and more in this direction. But I think for any institution, the goal needs to be creating an anti-racist culture, and one that everyone understands continually needs to be nourished, right, in order for it to function. That none of this will occur or be sustained just on its own or inevitably, but rather it is the result of continual work.
What specifically in your mind are some particular steps a university or institution can take to make their campus community anti-racist?
Well, I mean, I think I would go back to what I said about empathy and, steps that, can be taken to foster a culture of empathy on campus. And, that may mean faculty workshops around questions such as that. It might mean a new sort of course requirement for students where, faculty may be able to get their courses somehow recognized as, infusing sort of principles of empathy sort of into them, holding the line and saying that students absolutely need a well-rounded sort of liberal arts education, one that doesn't shortchange the humanistic studies. How do we infuse, humanistic questions into the learning of, scientific or more technical fields? So those are some things I think that are important. Continuing to discuss the salience of discrimination of different types, but also the resistance against discrimination, right? So that students continually understand the give and take, the struggle, both to oppress, but also to resist that oppression and to pursue liberation.
Well, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that we can continue these conversations throughout the next semester and the upcoming years, because they are such important conversations that we keep going.
I love that. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Professor Burrell.